Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I'll be painting a Death Guard Space Marine using similar recipes and techniques to the official studio scheme. I start off by base coating the model with Death Guard green. When we first painted these in the studio, we used a 50-50 mix of Deathworld Forest and Nurgling green, so you can always use that instead. I'm saving some time here by applying the base coat with an airbrush. This is applied over a light spray of Chaos Black primer. The shade that I'll be using for this armour is Athonian Camo shade. I thin this down with equal parts water to begin with, and I use this as a glazed shade over most of the armour panels. The Athonian shade takes a little bit of patience here, and I slowly build it up towards the lower parts of the armour panels and recesses. Don't worry too much if it's not super smooth here. A little streaking and patchiness could even help with the overall grimy look of the Death Guard. Usually I'm not a massive fan of using washes in general for this kind of thing, as they're less controlled than using paints. Washes can also change the finish of the surface, which is one of the problems that I ran into here. There's a few things you can do to solve this problem, such as using a matting agent or medium. Later on I use a small amount of Deathworld Forest mixed into the Athonian shade to help with the application and finish. However, if you have better luck with the Athonian shade alone, then that should be fine. I continue applying this wash to all the other parts of the armour, including the backpack and arms. The next step is the deep shade of Rhinox and Caliban. I personally like to go around and block out all the surrounding elements first, as it makes everything tidier, and it also means that we can leave a nice line shade between these parts of the armour later on. I use the same mix as a line shade between all of the armour panels, and I continue to do this for the rest of the armour. Once that's done, I use the base mix of Death Guard green again to start to add some texture and scratches to the lower shaded areas of the armour panels. I will pick these out later on with some further highlight stages. I continue to glaze the base mix of the Death Guard green back into the top of the panels. If this was for an army project, you could probably cut back on some of the glazing here, or skip it entirely. For the first real highlight here, I use Ogryn Camo. I mix a tiny bit of Death Guard green into it just to make it a little bit less harsh. I apply this highlight to all the edges of the armour. The final edge highlight on the armour is Krieg Khaki. This needs to be your sharpest highlight. You can concentrate this highlight towards the top edges if you wish to save a bit of time. I continue to highlight the rest of the armour with Krieg Khaki. Lastly, I pick out some of the upper edges and corners of the armour by adding white to the Krieg. Now it's time to paint the gold or copper elements. For this, I'm going to use some ProAcryl metallics, which is a slight deviation from the studio recipe. I basecoat everything using a mix of Doombull brown and ProAcryl copper. You can substitute this with Citadel Hashut copper instead for a rough equivalent. I believe these ProAcryl metallics to be much better than Citadel. They're much smoother and have better coverage, which makes them a lot of fun to work with. However, I think some of the Scale 75 metallics could also work out nice. After everything is base coated, I use a soft shade of Wyldwood contrast. I like the richness that this gives to the armour, but the original recipe would be something like Agrax. When that's done, I make a mix of Khorne red and black. We're looking for a nice dark burgundy. This can actually be glazed onto larger areas and used more concentrated around rivets and panel lines. For the first layered highlight here, I add ProAcryl Rich Gold into the base mix. You could also use any warm gold like Citadel Gehenna Gold or maybe Retribua. I applied this mostly towards the top edges of the trim, leaving the rich copper underneath. Next I added Vallejo Modeler Silver into the gold mix. I would say it's around a 50-50 ratio. I use this mix to further highlight the uppermost parts of the trim. One of the last things I like to do on the copper is to add some verdigris. I do this with some thin glazes of around a 50-50 mix of Sotek green and Cabalite. Here I'm adding increasing amounts of white to the green mix and placing it within the previous layers. This is all really up to your personal preference and what you think looks cool. Finally, all that's left to do now is the black weapon casing. Over the black base coat I apply a chunky edge highlight of Dark Reaper. I'm adding a tiny bit of black into this here just to make it a bit softer. The next stage highlight here is a mix of Dawnstone and Eshin. The recipe is Dawnstone alone, however I felt this was a little bit of a softer transition. At the same time here I'm picking out some chipping using the same highlight colour. After that I add a sharp edge highlight with Administratum Grey, followed by grey seared towards the uppermost edges and corners, and finally a white dot. The rivets here are then picked out in silver, and I add a bit of rust to complete the look. That's about it for this video. If you would like to see me tackle the rest of this miniature, feel free to check out my Patreon. Until next time guys, thanks for watching.